Welcome to Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery, a conversation held at the intersection of substance abuse, mental health, and everyday living. Your hosts, Mark Regala and Justin Wolf, bring both professional expertise and personal understanding to the table. So welcome to the conversation. Let's dive in.
Resiliency and Recovery. I'm your host, Justin Wolf, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mark Regala, this evening. And Mark, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. It's hard to believe we're halfway through June already.
Yeah, it is crazy. Time is just flying here.
Yep, time is flying.
We're talking about what June is like here in Illinois. Well, our guest tonight, Doug, comes from a very hot, and the only reason it is inhabitable is because of the fact we have the invention called air conditioning, zooming in all the way from Arizona tonight. So, Doug, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Got an air conditioner in the other room. It's kind of cool in here.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm sure it's only a smooth 95 degrees outside.
Yeah, luckily I'm in Prescott, not in Phoenix.
Yeah. They used to always say when I lived down there, they're like, oh, but it's a dry heat, right? So when you're talking about like temperatures like 110, 120, it's like, you know what else is dry heat? Your oven. Like
Right.
That doesn't make this more bearable. So, yeah. No, but we're joined tonight by Doug, and I think this is going to be a great episode where we're kind of diving in and talking about, people's real life experiences that drive them to kind of go and pursue the work that they carry out in this world. And I know, Doug, that's something that I think you have a great story to kind of share here with our audience about what drove you to really go and work directly with individuals who have been impacted by co-occurring disorders and the disease of addiction. Like, what was it for you that really pushed you in that direction?
Well, what drove me to this work was, I suppose you would say, a Toyota Sequoia when I was hired as the driver over at Royal Life Centers. So what drove me to this work was driving. Now, what drove me to be the driver is a longer story, which I'll share some of the details of, but the long story short is I had been homeless in Prescott, Arizona, and I had been living either in my Volkswagen Jetta in campsites or sometimes in a parking structure. And I had spent a week in the VA hospital down in Phoenix for suicidal ideation earlier, about 6 months prior to when I started at Royal. And because things were, pretty low point in my life. And when I got out of there, I just made this idea to myself that I was just going to be a virtuous person. I was just going to go through life and try to make the right decisions, and had maybe like $80 to my name in my car. And luckily I got hooked up with a veterans organization that put me in a hotel. And I was going back and forth between doing some dishwashing jobs in restaurants and then working jobs that I found off of Craigslist. And I was hosting a chess club at a coffee shop in downtown Prescott where I was giving people free chess lessons, which I often do nowadays with clients. One of the things clients like to do is try to challenge me at chess. And, the long story short is the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen in my life sat down in front of me for a free chess lesson, and she's now the lady in the next room with our baby. And when we started dating, she said to me, I'm not going to take you seriously until you have a full-time job and an apartment. So bam, I just went on to Indeed.com, and next thing I know, the place that happens to have been right next to her apartment, which is now my apartment, which is Chapter 5 next door, hired me on as the driver. And what was kind of amazing about it is that, my story involves several periods of homelessness. And if there's any reason that I feel like I connect well with our clients, it's because a lot of our clients have had that experience as well. One of the things that I love that comes up is that we talk sometimes about how our appreciation for things will change given in our status in life. So I'll talk about in the past. I was working as a technical writer for Microsoft, and when I was working as a technical writer for Microsoft, and if I ordered a pizza, and if there were the wrong toppings on the pizza, I was the guy that was cussing out the person on the phone. I was going on Yelp. I demanded a replacement pizza. I want a refund. Whereas I was living as a street poet in Austin, Texas, where I'd sit in the middle of the road with a sign on my back that said, "We'll write for tips." And if someone walked by and had a pizza box and they put it in the garbage can and I ran over and there were 2 slices left, I'm the happiest guy on the planet. I don't care what they are, you know? So I think that my experience there and the experience that a lot of our clients have had help us to take a greater appreciation in life, that we can see that the things that we would have taken for granted had we continued to live a quote unquote normal life, maybe because we've been down and out, we can take appreciation for these things in life that seemed to us so small in the past.
Right. And as you talk about like that down and out piece there, or just kind of being like, hey, like multiple times facing homelessness, and still, yet you're here today to talk about a totally different lifestyle as being lived. How did you kind of push through those moments? Like, what helped you?
I've always had in the back of my mind this drive that something great is going to happen in my life, or that I have some kind of purpose that I'm going to fulfill. And even when, even when I was living as the street poet, for instance, I took great joy in the little moments because I would just sit there in the middle of the road in Austin, Texas, downtown, and on a Friday night, and people would be wandering by, and people would be making fun of me at first, but eventually someone would sit down and see what my way of doing it was all by my superpower is I can write perfect cursive, on unlined paper, and I would write something out for them that would just kind of, blow their minds or whatever. So I was doing that. I also, believe it or not, during that time I was publishing a book, which had been my PhD dissertation, which was a translation of an Old English poem. So I had like in the back of my mind that I was somehow carrying forth something from the past into the present, from like the distant past or something like that, and that I had, I actually had some kind of function that I was supposed to perform. But then like linking this to my current work now, it's that, I grew up with a relatively, like middle class. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a homemaker. I went to, a middle class high school. I went off to college. Or actually went to the Naval Academy at first, and then I went off to a different college afterwards, and was sort of going down this sort of like normal path. And I didn't really, I thought that poverty meant that you were living in a small apartment, and I really found that when I was living homelessly, I started encountering different people with different kinds of stories, and really the kind of people that I would have scorned. I mean, I was the kind of person, like I said, when I was working for Microsoft, I had scorn for people in the service industry, whereas now it's like I feel like I have this whole different respect for people that are working, and no matter what place they are in life, because of these experiences where I was talking to people. But then I also started encountering a lot of people that were very, very heavily involved in drugs. And as I've told you already, Justin, one of the things that I guess is unique about me in the recovery world is that I myself have never been in recovery. And I was thinking about your previous podcast about how a lot of people that are working in this job talk about how it's their own experience through recovery that motivates them. And I've definitely been a pothead, and I've definitely had periods of time in my life where I've drank too much. But it's never been something that has led to me going into like a detox facility or anything like that. But I did, through these experiences, encounter lots of people that were involved in these sort of things. And because of, I guess, just my personality or elements of my background, I became like an ad hoc street counselor or something of that nature, And it's like I always was feeling like this is something that I need to figure out some kind of way to incorporate in my life, And then in my I spent about 13 years as a English teacher, primarily college English teaching, which involves a lot of, what you would call like teaching an English class and doing a group therapy session are not that far away from each other. Doing a one-on-one meeting with a student and doing a one-on-one meeting with a patient or a client are not that much different from each other. So I find that like the skills that I had developed in what I had thought was going to be the previous iteration of my life turned out to be something that I feel like I can apply to the world that I'm dealing with now.
Right. I mean, especially when you're talking about delivering an English class in a college levels, really kind of creating that buy-in and that engagement piece. But also when you meet with people one-on-one there, they're coming to you a lot of times because they don't understand something. They need help. They need assistance or support. And you're kind of being viewed as that individual who's going to provide that.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
offer that.
And the college English teacher is often identified as the person that you can go and talk to you about your problems. Like I remember once we were reading The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner in an intro to literature class, where part of the plot is that the son who's supposed to save the Compson family, Quentin, goes off to Harvard, and he ends up killing himself on a bridge. He jumps off a bridge. There's actually even a monument to the fictional character in Boston. And I had a student come into my office and say, I feel like I'm Quentin. And this led to like a little ad hoc therapy session helping this guy deal with his suicidal ideation. Well, flash forward to now where I'm sitting in a little room with a client who is trying to get over his addiction, that's talking to me about how he uses alcohol as a slow means of suicide. So it's like I see these connections between things that have happened in previous iterations of my life and things that are happening now.
Right. And as you bring that up, Mark and I just got out of running a dual diagnosis group, and the idea of like, hey, self-medication, Mark brought up and was sharing. And I thought Mark had a profound insight and view in just like that, the role that the substance or drug of choice might play for us in medicating things that we might not even recognize or acknowledge that anything's wrong. And I know, Mark, you said it much better than I. So I'd love to kind of hear you kind of expand on that, because I think you have some great insight in there.
In regards to the mental health conditions, not knowing you have a mental health condition, is that what you're talking about, Justin?
Yeah, like when you're talking about that, like the self-medication and how like using all
it's just like, I can only speak from my perspective, but it just seems so common throughout the addiction and alcoholic world is that, it typically is driven by an underlying issue. Like in my particular case, it's PTSD, general anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder. But the thing is I never knew I had PTSD. I never knew that I had general anxiety. I had panic attacks. I didn't even know I had panic attacks. I just thought there was something wrong with me. I never took the time to educate what a panic attack was. I knew I was having, depressive thoughts, but the thing about it is, in order for me to feel better or self-medicate, I basically went to drinking and then eventually to, abusing pain medication that was being prescribed to me for a neck and back issue, because I didn't know what was wrong with me. And it was only after I was in addiction and started working with the therapist, and the therapist diagnosed me with these conditions, it was kind of like the aha moment. I mean, there were symptoms dating all the way back to my childhood, but I just had ignorance or a lack of knowledge when it came from mental health, and I just thought there was something wrong with me. And I just wanted to feel better. And I chose to feel better by, starting with drinking, and then eventually led to, to drug usage and so forth. But it's interesting you brought up that comment about a slow suicide with the drinking, because I actually just used that analogy in our dual diagnosis support group as well. And that's exactly what I said. I mean, whether you put alcohol in your system or some type of drug in your system, it might not necessarily be it's eventually going to take years or days off of your life. It's going to take its toll on your body. It basically is, a slow suicide. I mean, I don't know if you were in there for Justin, but I just actually used that analogy.
Yeah, I caught that part. I was in there for that.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, because it's like we were talking about it in there, and I think it's just a very common thing that comes up when, it's like the other side of the coin, Doug, that you were talking about earlier. We were talking about like the very thing that like kind of drives you is hope. This is the idea,
yes,
like
exactly.
we're kind of caught up in the thralls of it all. where it's like there is no hope. I don't see an out.
Yeah,
And so I might as well get comfortable in this place where I'm at because my time's ticking, and if it goes, it goes.
Yeah, one of the themes that I come back to when I'm dealing with clients, whether in a group or an individual setting, is that you can't only be focused on giving up the substance. You have to be focused on finding some sort of purpose in your life. And once you have that or things to take joy in your life, and once you have those things, you start to realize that the substances are getting in the way of those things. Whereas if you're just thinking, I have to stop using this substance, but there's nothing there, that's going to lead eventually to a kind of emptiness that will then make it much more likely that the person relapses.
Right, because it's like, hey, I'm using this to kind of fill up this void inside of me that it seems like no matter how much I feed it, it's never enough.
Yes.
And so it's like you're kind of filling this basin up with water, thinking that it's going to get filled, but you just don't realize, hey, the bottom's cracked. And so it's leaking out the same way at the same time I'm pouring it in.
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I've kind of seen when you're kind of bringing this up, man, is like when you're talking about in groups, is just the idea of like purpose tied with like, who am I? Because that's what it comes down to, is like, what's my identity? Who the hell am I going to be now? Like, this is what has been comfortable and familiar for me for quite some time. And now I'm going to give this up. Well, I sure as hell better have a good reason, right?
Right. And then there's the idea that you find your identity not in some, I mean, the future plans and the future goals are a part of it, but really the identity occurs in the moment. Like, I'll say something like this often to clients, where I'll say, right now, the only thing that really matters in the world is the three of us are right here sharing consciousness with one another. And now we're radiating it out to an audience, of course, so somehow that radiates out. But right now, the only moment that really matters for me is I'm sitting here in Prescott, Arizona, in a room, talking to the two of you about my experiences. And this is reality. This is my identity. I remember one day I was walking down the street from one of our facilities to the other one that are only like a block and a half apart. And I was in a very pensive mood because the previous group got a little bit heavy. And I was thinking about the identity. And I suddenly felt this overwhelming feeling of joy because I just thought to myself, I am he who walks on the sidewalk. And that's unequivocally true. You know, there's no way that I don't have to have anxiety about whether this is the right thing, because this is just the case, because there I was walking on the sidewalk. And that idea is radiated out of my mind because I told that story to the next group that I was going to, and then I've retold that story several times. And I find that, you know, why do certain memories stick? You mentioned I have some PTSD stuff going on too that's also diagnosed, and I also have the major depressive disorder. And one of the things that I like to say almost jokingly, like, don't have PTSD, have PHEE, post happiness excitement enhancement. You know, like use the same part of your brain that triggers you to go back to past horrible events, and instead use that part of your brain to go back to past happy and joyous events. You know, and then you can allow each experience you have to radiate out into your future. And this starts with being aware in the moment that every moment might be this great moment that ripples out into the future and remains in your memory.
No, and I think that's great feedback and that's like a great goal for everybody to have, right? Like, I need to kind of change my perspective. I need to kind of get a different view, take a different angle at what I'm going through or what I've been through. And that's really difficult. And so, like, people are always saying, right? Like, I've always thought like this, or it's always been like this. How do you like align with like your clients that you're working with there to kind of help them gain that different view?
Well, for one, is that reminding them that the moment that we're in is unlike any other moment that we have had before. Sometimes I like to use this analogy of like, imagine that we're all in a simulation, right? And what if just for the sake of, I'm not saying that this is true, but I'm saying just
We're all
use
in the Matrix. I got you.
this mental exercise. Like, imagine that when you woke up this morning, all of the memories in your mind were just implanted by Elon Musk. And this is just the hand that you were dealt. It doesn't really have anything to do with the present you that is there in the moment. It's simply the experiences that you have to deal with. So that's one way that I go. I also like to do the going the opposite of the emotion tactic. And the one that I really like is that the opposite of regret is experience. So if you have anything from your past that you feel regret about, well, that's actually that negative emotion, just like anxiety is a signal for hope, and anger is a signal for passion, and depression is a signal for thoughtfulness. Regret is a signal that there was something that you gained out of that experience that you feel like you have regret for. So instead of sitting here and continuing to feel regret about that situation, try to see what the positive side of that experience was, out of which you can gain some sort of insight, whether about your identity or about the world or about others.
Right. I know that's like one of the most challenging things to do, especially early on.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of saying, hey, I'm used to beating myself up over all these missed opportunities, all these things that my life could have played out 100% completely different if I had just made a different choice in that time. So,
oh, yes.
How can I not carry regret is like what my mind would say to me, right? Like, so what would you do with that?
Well, what I do with that is just know that that is present. I mean, I certainly have things in my life that I think that, oh, if this had just gone the other way, what would I, had I started off as a physics major at the U.S. Naval Academy. Had I stayed on that path, I'd be, working for SpaceX right now or something. But maybe in that reality, I got hit by a bus the next day. Again, it's coming back to the fact that all of these things that we think that we have regret for are things that we don't really know what the outcome would have been in that other situation. Things because we always make that imagined what could have been all rose colored and everything worked out perfectly. As if we had made this one choice, everything else that happened would have been awesome and amazing. But we don't know that would have happened. The only thing that we know that happened is that right now I'm sitting on my little rocking chair in my baby's bedroom talking to you two. And that's all that I really know for sure. So there's no reason to have any regret about anything from the past, because this reality is beautiful in itself. And I'll say this to groups sometimes, like, how beautiful is it that you're sitting on a couch right now, or how beautiful is it that you were able to take a shower this morning? And again, this is going back to those homeless vibes again, which is not all of our clients, but a lot of them. I share a story with them too about how when I first got placed into the hotel by the Veterans Organization, how I was so amazed by locking the door behind me. And I went in and I took like a 45-minute shower, and the room had 2 beds, and I was actually alternating which bed I was sleeping on each night because I was so excited to have a bed. And it's like, make sure that you're taking joy in all the little things. Take joy in the orange juice that's in the refrigerator over there that's being provided to you by the treatment facility that you're in. And then, if in the world that you wished happened because of your regret, maybe there was no orange juice.
So true. It's so true. Because I think that's the part when we talk about regret and kind of like getting stuck staring in the rear view of our life, we miss out on what's going on in the here and now, which is exactly what you're kind of alluding to. And I know exactly. That was like when Mark and I kind of like went through this and started talking about this podcast and our stories, and there was similarities. And of course, meeting somebody else like Mark who had a traumatic brain injury, like myself, like that was like, oh my God, cool. Like you're like me.
Yeah.
But
I also had a traumatic brain injury.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
So, no, but I think that's the part where that regret and that what if, like this horrible thing happened to me. This isn't fair. Life should not be acting like this.
Yeah.
And everything in my world before this accident, before my car accident, because I was convinced. I was 100% convinced. Mind you, I was in my, 3rd year of college. I think at that time, at a junior college in Arizona, and I'd been an adjunct student at a point, which I like somehow was taking one class for a semester.
Nice.
So really winning at the game.
Yeah.
But I was convinced that when I got in that car accident and I had this traumatic brain injury and I was in a coma and I was in the hospital for weeks and all of a sudden I was like Drew Barrymore from 51st States, that my life, I'm like, it was going so wonderful beforehand. And that it was everything I had wanted it to be. And I remember vividly the further I got away from that and started kind of moving more in a direction that brought like meaning and purpose and like that identity we were talking about earlier. It's just like, I was so uncomfortable in my own skin that all I could think about was just getting away from me.
Right.
And finding whatever way I could do that, whether it was working out, drinking, smoking, popping, like whatever it was, just to kind of not be present in my own skin, because I go down that road and I'm just filled with like the word we've been throwing around, like regret, the what ifs, if only, and just got out this like poor me pity pot of like,
exactly.
Hey, this clearly isn't working for you, buddy. You got to do something different. That's why I think when you're kind of saying, hey, let's kind of get back and say, you're in the moment right here, right now, where you can actually inspire that change that you're looking for. Like, that's so powerful.
And then inspire the clients to the people in recovery to realize that this is like this is real.
Mm-hmm.
You know, another little one of my little like sort of catchphrases that I use in groups is I will say, Justin, when you were in your active addiction, there was a Justin-shaped hole in the world, and Mark, there was a Mark-shaped hole in the world, and that you were taking yourself out of your best self by going into your addictive behavior. The world needs Justin. The world needs Mark. And the two of you now are fulfilling that by doing what this is right now. So, and that seems to resonate with the clients as well, because a lot of times, you know, there's feeling very down on themselves and feeling like a lot of like self-loathing, especially in the, I mean, I mostly am seeing patients within the first 30 days, you know, and then we have an IOP program also, which could be people up to 6 months, where in a sense, things can get even worse in a way, because, you know, it's 4.5 months down the line and you're just working as a dishwasher, and like you had all these dreams for your life and everything, where it's like, ugh, is this what life is going to be?
Yeah.
Am I going to have to get up every day and like go to my job that I don't like and not even be making enough money to pay rent? You know, so those moments are really difficult as well, but it's like right there where it's time to take a look at the fact, all right, at least I'm contributing something to the world right now. At least I'm finding myself. At least I'm interacting with other people with my real me, and not some false version of me that's enhanced or altered by substances.
So really kind of preaching on like practicing gratitude, changing that frame and kind of acknowledging, you know, what we do have versus focusing on what's missing or what's not enough.
Yes, very much. You know, and not focusing on what you don't have, but focus on what you actually do have and what's around, you know? A lot of times I find that clients will get upset about things that they've lost in their lives, like material goods, like, you know, cars and housing situations or whatever. And this is, I tell this story about how, you know, I at one time had like a house that I owned. Well, I was paying, you know, mortgage on, but I actually had a house that I owned, and I had like the shed, and in the shed I had like the toolbox that had all the full complement of tools and everything. And I didn't even like appreciate them either. They just kind of sat there. But then like a couple months ago, I was setting up a shelf. Actually, that shelf, the one you see in the background right there.
This very shelf.
This very shelf I was setting up. And I went to, now I just have a little drawer in a dresser that has my, you know, my very small complement of tools. And I went to go get my level. And I'm looking through and I'm like, I don't have a level anymore. You know, and I was like irrationally upset for a little while over my lost level. You know, but then it's like, no, I stuck a ball up on there just to see if it rolled one way or the other, and I was fine. But like, if you get hung up on the things that you once had in the past that you don't have anymore, you're not taking any kind of appreciation for the things that you actually do have that are right in front of you.
And it sounds like that's like a key thing that you really make sure that the people that you work with are walking away from those interactions with you. They're just like, hey, I have an understanding now of where I kind of fit into this world, after treatment.
Yeah,
Because
hopefully, that's what the hope is,
right. Because I think that's the key in all of this. It's like, hey, like you're in this, really safe, what's supposed to be safe, secure little bubble to kind of like work on yourself and focus on you and dive into these things that don't really kind of get the attention that they need. So that
Right.
when you transition in the real world, you've got these tools and these resources so you can kind of put your key in the ignition, turn it, and run with it here.
I often mention to clients that they're very fortunate to be in the situation that they're in, because there's not another kind of environment that I can imagine where there's people around that are all together just working on developing themselves. It's not like, I mean, there's a little ways that it's like a college dorm insofar as they're all trying to learn together, but then there's always like a subject matter and you're not really focused on yourself. As many of the clients point out, there's some analogies to being in prison, but it's different than that because you can kind of walk out the door whenever you want to, but again, it's similar in the fact that there's people that are all kind of thrust together into a community, but it's its own kind of thing where you are sitting in a recovery center in order to just learn more about yourself and try to figure out what's going on in your minds, while all of your other your lower level Maslow's hierarchy of needs are all being taken care of. So you have this time to just delve into these deeper things that you might not have even ever thought about before.
Right. I think one of the most foundational things we were kind of talking about earlier, tonight, it came up in the support group where it's like, hey, like the opposite of addiction is connection, right? And so people feeling like they have a place, like, hey, I belong here. I'm not just an outsider or this like misfit. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I actually got a place and I actually have people who genuinely accept and appreciate and want to be around me versus eyes roll, shunned, and just like really feeling not included or a part of anything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I see that what will often happen is that the people that have been there for 3 weeks in a 30-day program become like mentors automatically to the people that are just arriving. Yeah, it's great. You see that too, Mark?
Absolutely. And I talked to a lot of people, and everybody's, including me, the first time that I went to treatment, a 30-day program. I mean, you got shame, you got guilt, you got fear, and you got every reason in your mind about why you can't do this. I got my family dependent on my income. I got, employees at work. I'm the manager, of them. I got to, manage their quotas and help them make sales and so forth. You get all these reasons, but then you go in there, and I often tell people, it probably was one of the most peaceful months, and probably the month that I've grown the most was when I was in treatment because there's no cell phone. You don't have to worry about paying bills. There's no distractions. In my instance, there was 23 guys, okay, and all we did was focus on ourselves. We were getting up in the morning, lifting weights. We played, basketball or softball outside, on the weekends. We had greet our visitors from AA and NA. We had our breakout sessions and so forth. I mean, it literally was so peaceful. And I look at like where I'm at right now. I mean, that kind of catapulted me from a growth perspective to help me become the person that I am today. But there was so much fear initially.
Yeah,
but when I talk to people now, I'm like, it's not a bad thing. It's actually going to be a good thing for you, and you're going to find yourself in there during those 30 days, or start to find yourself in there during those 30 days.
Mm-hmm. Right, because it's uncomfortable doing the work to kind of dive in and really examine ourselves. Because I think that's part where it's like, hey, like that doubt can creep in there along with it and be like, can I really do this? And what if other people's hopes get up? Am I going to disappoint them? That's a lot to take on.
And then this goes to another reason why the clients are very fortunate to be there, because most people don't really think about day-to-day personal growth. But once the client has been in the recovery center, then there's this idea that growth is something that has to continue over a lifetime.
Yeah.
So it's like you get finished with the program and you realize that, okay, if I can continue to grow at the rate that I did during those first 30 days, I'm going to be an enlightened being by the time I leave this planet, you know?
So what have you found to be really helpful, Doug? Like that really helps clients keep growing once they're outside those doors?
Well, I think that, like kind of an easy answer would be taking some of the tools that they learn and continue to practice them. So stuff like you were just saying, Mark, of getting a routine where you get up and work out every
Yep.
morning. So I'll say that to clients a lot when they're feeling down. Well, just make sure you do something in the morning for yourself, like do a few push-ups or do some meditative exercise. So setting those kind of habits. Another thing is that having some kind of concentration on spiritual development. So thinking about how I like to make this. It's easy to we often talk about like the mind body distinction, but I make this multi-layered where I talk about how we have our body, then we have our brain, then we have our mind, then we have our spirit, and then we have our soul, and how it goes from the most physical to the brain is like the physical part of our intellect, the mind is kind of like the intangible part of our intellect, our spirit is what connects that, and our soul is our thing that is totally cosmic. So remembering that we are not a body that just happens to have a soul. We're more a soul that just happens to have a body. And keeping in mind that like what we are encountering in this world actually matters in some cosmic way, in the same way that the three of us are connected during this conversation. Somehow our consciousnesses are interacting with one another and becoming connected. All of us all around the world are connected, and what I believe about one component of the afterlife, or whatever happens after this life, is there's somehow that connection that we have is more manifest, and what we do in this life somehow brings about something better, not just in our own futures here, but in our futures beyond. So keeping our minds to those things, and knowing that it's not like we go through life and the things we do don't really matter. Like,
right.
It matters a whole lot. Like the only thing really that I can affect right now is how well I'm encountering this podcast that we're doing right now. This is the only thing over which I have any kind of effect. If I decide to blow this off, and if I suddenly start like, man, clients are terrible, I can't deal with this kind of. If I started having that like attitude, all of a sudden that would radiate out not just into my practical future, but also into some kind of cosmic future that's beyond our understanding.
Well, I think it kind of comes back to like, hey, like our choices and the actions that we take, it impacts others, and it impacts ourselves sometimes in ways that we're not even aware of, right? It's because like I'm always reminded of like that person that's having a really bad day, and they're just kind of down, and you can see that they're in pain and they're hurting, and then you see somebody walk over to them, like put their arm around and say, hey, I'm here. Like, what do you need? Like, what would be helpful, right? Like just being seen. Or even just somebody's like smile on those dark days. Like it has such a powerful impact. And like a lot of times these individuals might not even recognize it or realize it, but there's just so much power in acknowledging and seeing another person as a person, and not as like something that's getting in our way or a nuisance or some like a box to check. Because I hear in treatment all the time, people will feel like, hey, I'm just something you have to do. I don't feel like you're actually seeing me as an individual here. And what I hear when I hear that, I'm like, you don't feel like there's that connection. You don't feel like there's that understanding going back and forth, and that there's not this working relationship dynamic here. It's a like one-up type position, and that's not good for work.
No, not at all. And that energy that we put out and the vibes that we put out are so important. When we talk about relationships often in groups, and one of the things that I like to bring up is how important what I call temporary relationships are. So like a temporary relationship is like the person in front of you in line at the supermarket. And if you're sitting there like seething and angry because this lady has too many groceries, you're sending out like negative energy and negative vibes toward this person. So that's the very moment where you try to feel some sort of positive vibe. Or if you're stuck in traffic, and I love to bring this one up, if you're stuck in traffic and you start like sneering and leering at all the people that are around you, you're sending out negative energy, even if you're never going to see this person or encounter this person again. But then just, try this and see if it doesn't work. Try thinking positive thoughts about all the people in the cars around you and see if a lane doesn't suddenly open up for you. And even if it doesn't, you'll start to feel like a joy in that moment that you were never feeling before.
Definitely. Again, it's kind of back to like changing that perspective and helping people understand. It's like, hey, just because you've always thought like this or you've always done it this way doesn't mean that we still can't do it a different way. Right. And I think that's where like that idea of like hope comes in, and just change as a whole. Because you'll hear where people come into treatment like, this is my 11th treatment. What's going to be different? Well, this really matters to you because you've shown up. So this really must be important to you, right? And it's acknowledging that and validating and seeing the effort that's being made. It goes a long way. And so I think that's where, appreciate you joining with us tonight, Doug, because I think you had some great insight in your story about just how you kind of used your own story to kind of be an example of just like, hey, there's hope, and really trying to carry that to the individuals that you're serving and that you're working with on a day in and day out basis to try and inspire that change so that they can get to living a life that's worth living. Because when you feel like your life's worth living, things take on a whole different feel to them versus my goal is just get through the day. You know what I mean? So it's now you're living, you're thriving, you're taking a hold of it. And so appreciate you kind of sharing your wisdom and your experiences and joining us here tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
Excellent. And so before we get out of here, Mark, any closing thoughts tonight, my friend?
Well, the comment that you made, Doug, about the purpose, finding the purpose, I think that's very important because you want your life to be meaningful. And I look back at my challenges that I went through, and I've made a lot of bad decisions, and I create a lot of chaos for my family. But I can honestly say, I might have some regret, but I don't necessarily regret my addictions and the path that I went down, because through it all, growth occurred. Through it all, I became the person that I am today. And honestly, I'm a lot more content with the person in the mirror, a lot happier with the person in the mirror than even the person that was pre-addiction, that was an executive in the insurance industry making a lot of money. I am. And I think through the challenges that I went through and the growth that I occurred, you do find a different purpose in life. I would have never have guessed that I would be doing this. I would have never have guessed that I'd be speaking at hospitals. I would never have guessed that I'd be being so active in the recovery community, especially when I was in addiction, because I didn't think that I was going to get out of addiction, But, so much that you said is very profound, with that and the whole spirituality thing, positive thoughts, retraining the brain to focus on the positives is so important. I used to be a glass half empty type of guy. Now I try to always look at the positive of every situation. It can be the most challenging thing, whether it's in the business world or personal. I got to, initially maybe the brain will go to, oh my God, why does this happen to me again? But I know myself where I can actually take a step back and be like, okay, well, this sucks, but what's the positive I can take out of this situation? What can I learn from the situation? So, everything that you have said is very similar to what I try to communicate, whether it be in support groups or speaking at hospitals and so forth. So I really do appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your insight.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you guys too.
Definitely. And so, again, this is wonderful. It's a great conversation. Really enjoyed it. And I hope everybody else listening is also thoroughly enjoying this as well. So we are happy everybody's joining us on these discussions. These podcasts will air on the 15th and the 30th of each month. So be sure to tune in. there's any topics that you'd like to see Mark and myself dive into, feel free to reach out to us and let us know. We can be reached at namidupage.org/podcast to connect with us. Again, that's namidupage.org/podcast. And feel free to give us any feedback, thoughts, suggestions, topics you'd like to see us dive into, because we are more than happy to kind of do that and stay present with what's going on.
I have a question for you, Justin. What does your T-shirt say? I've never seen you wear a T-shirt on one of these podcasts before. Stand up. Let's see it.
All right. I feel like I've hyped this up. So here we go. Your ego is not your amigo.
There you go.
So,
there you
this
go.
shirt's been referenced in previous episodes. And so
It has been.
So tonight's the night. Got to wear this, rock this out there. It's just so true.
100%.
I mean, it was kind of getting alluded to earlier, but yeah, the ego is something that definitely had to be tackled in my world.
I think all of our worlds, to be honest with you.
I know, right? It's like, what do you mean the world doesn't revolve around me?
Exactly.
This is craziness. You don't know who I am? You should know. No. So on that note, thanks everybody for joining, and feel free. We had this T-shirt made, so I'm sure you can get your own. Your ego is not your amigo shirts, handcrafted. So, until next time. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Doug.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us today on Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. If you're on the journey to find guidance and insights, subscribe now wherever you find your podcasts. Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery is an educational resource, not a substitute for medical or therapeutic advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of NAMI DuPage. Go to namidupage.org/podcast for links to past episodes, show notes, and to submit a question or topic ideas for a future episode. Until next time, be well.